Hey Culture Crew, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Kulture Kids Storytime. Today I wanted to cover a national hero in Jamaica. So everybody knows that my family is Jamaican, and I'm super proud of my culture and heritage because it's so rich and so dynamic, and we have given the world some amazing heroes to look up to. Today we're going to be talking about Marcus Garvey. I remember growing up and my father telling me stories about all of the strides that Marcus Garvey made to bring Black people together, to realize that no matter if we are in Africa, the Caribbean, America, South America, Europe, we are all one people. And the best way to get to our economic powerhouse that we used to be is to band together and make a change. So let's dive into this story entitled The Success of Marcus Garvey, written by Akua Agusi. Everyone is born with a divine purpose. Some people's purpose finds them while others have to seek theirs. In the case of Marcus Garvey, his mother had a feeling from very early on that her son would accomplish great things. For this reason, she gave him the middle name Mosiah. Mrs. Garvey's intuition was correct. Marcus lived to become an incredible, fearless leader. He toured the world teaching Black people to be proud of their heritage, encourage them to be entrepreneurs, as well as unite and create a strong African nation around the globe. Marcus was born into this world on August 17, 1887, in the small town of St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica. He was the youngest of 11 children. Marcus's father worked as a stonemason, someone who creates things out of cut stone. Marcus's father also had a natural love of books. He loved to read. At times, he would stay in a room and read all day long. It is believed that Marcus learned to love books too because of his father. Marcus's love of reading made him quite the scholar. He would often challenge other children to choose words out of the dictionary for him to spell, just for fun. His favorite books were about Jamaican slave revolts. A slave revolt is when slaves would stand up against the people enslaving them and take their freedom. To Marcus, these people were heroes. It was when Marcus was a child that he first encountered racism. His best friend at the time was a white girl from Europe. As they got older, the girl's father told her that she could no longer be friends with Marcus because he was Black. That really offended Marcus because he knew that he had been a good friend to her and that being Black was not a bad thing at all. When Marcus was 12 years old, his life became really difficult. He lost his father and 9 of his 10 brothers and sisters. Marcus was left with one sister, Indiana, and his mother. After the loss of his father and siblings, his family, much like many others during this time period, did not have much money. Marcus was forced to get a job when he was 14 years old to help take care of his family. Marcus got a job in a popular city called Kingston, which is the capital city of Jamaica. He worked at a print shop where he made magazines and books. 2 years later, Marcus started another job at a newspaper printing company. He was always trying to better himself, so while working there, he began learning at least 4 new vocabulary words a day. Marcus would write sentences using the new words to make sure that he remembered them and their meaning. He also began reading the newspapers. He often read in the Jamaican newspaper about other poor people in his country and realized that his family was not the only one that was struggling. When he would walk home from work, he began to notice all the people that had tattered clothes, no food to eat, and broken down homes. This began to make him feel very disappointed and upset. Marcus decided to move to Costa Rica in South America, where people were moving to work in the banana plantations. He traveled through many areas of South America, but still all he could find were more poor people of color. Marcus was very confused as to why the people were so poor. It was during this time that he learned about slavery and how it affected African people's history. He learned that during times of slavery that millions of African people were kidnapped and shipped all over the world for money. White slave owners would break up families and beat slaves for speaking their native language, partly because the white people did not know the language and didn't want the Africans to speak to one another and come up with a way to revolt. The slave owners would also not allow Africans to practice many of the different rituals of their culture. One of the only things that Africans were allowed to do was dance. and that was just to entertain other white slave owners or guests of the plantation. He discovered that when slavery ended, people were mostly taken from West Africa were now living in other countries like Jamaica, the Caribbean islands, the United States of America, South America, and Europe. He also discovered that they were living in poverty. Many of the Africans had not been allowed to learn to read during slavery. Because of this, they were only able to get jobs similar to the work they had done on slave plantations. This made it very difficult for the African population to advance in society or even take care of their families. He was outraged. The more he learned, the more distraught he became, so he committed himself to focusing on a solution. He read a book written by a famous black author named Booker T. Washington, which was entitled Up from Slavery. This book gave Marcus the inspiration and motivation to want to make a difference and become a leader for his black African people. Marcus returned to Jamaica and shared what he had learned, but wasn't able to get enough people together. So Marcus made a plan. He was going to get a huge group of African people together from all over the world and unite them. He felt as one, they would have more power and resources. No matter where on the planet a black person lived, this organization's sole purpose would be to improve life for them. In 1914, Marcus organized the UNIA, which stands for Universal Negro Improvement Association. During this time period, black people or Africans were called Negroes. Negro is a Spanish word that means black. Marcus had one of his first speeches at church, with about 100 people listening. When he walked to the podium and saw all the people in the audience, he felt very shocked and scared. He got so nervous he actually fell. He got so embarrassed that he rushed out of the church. Marcus went home and practiced. He went to listen to other people's speeches and became more confident. He was determined next time he would do better. In 1916, Marcus arrived in New York after traveling throughout the United States looking for UNIA supporters. By 1919, the UNIA had over 100,000 members, and Marcus Garvey finally got his second chance to give a speech in front of a large crowd in a popular church. This time, he was ready. He had been practicing and now had the courage he lacked the first time. Marcus successfully delivered his speech and the people cheered. He gained an additional 2,000 members within weeks. Marcus came to find that a lot of the hardships that Africans were experiencing in the other countries he had visited were also happening in the USA. He also learned that a lot of black soldiers that had recently returned from war in Europe were now back in New York and very upset. While the soldiers were fighting the war in Europe, they were treated with a level of humanity and respect. However, after returning home, they were greeted with the same issues of discrimination and unfair treatment that they had left years earlier. The soldiers were met with new rules called Jim Crow laws. That meant black people could not share facilities with white people, such as restaurants, bathrooms, and schools. This prompted many of the ex-soldiers to join the UNIA, feeling comfort in Marcus Garvey's mission of unity for the African mankind. The year 1919 also saw more progress for Marcus. He married a woman named Amy that he had loved for a very long time. They wrote many love letters back and forth from Jamaica. Amy even saved his life by throwing herself in front of an armed man that wanted to shoot Marcus Garvey. Thankfully, she and Marcus were okay. They made a great team. Amy assisted him in both UNIA and the newspaper he started. It was a weekly newspaper called Negro World. In this paper, he included a lot of information that he gave during meetings and speeches. The newspaper was another tool used to encourage black people, and because it reached so many people, he could keep everyone informed of issues that faced African people. By now, Marcus Garvey had become an infamous leader. Marcus Garvey held the very first UNIA gathering in Harlem, New York. It began with a grand parade with lots of women and men marching down Lenox Avenue. They were shouting, singing, and holding UNIA signs. After the parade, Marcus gave a speech with close to 25,000 people listening. Marcus had conquered his fear of speaking in public. He said things like, "Up, you mighty race, and accomplish what you will," which means be proud of who you are and you can do anything you set your mind to. He also started the signature saying, "One God, one aim, and one destiny." During that time, a lot of people felt ashamed to be Black because they didn't believe they had a reason to feel proud. They believed that all Black people were poor. They didn't know much about Black kings, queens, and warriors of Africa. They had no idea of the rich culture they once possessed while practicing their own culture in Africa. Marcus Garvey reminded them that they should learn about history and culture of their African people and feel proud. No one should feel ashamed of who they are. The people loved his speech and many signed up for UNIA that very same day. Over time, there were thousands of UNIA offices in over 40 countries all over the world. The largest branches were in parts of the United States such as Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. There were also offices in South America, Jamaica, and even Africa. The UNIA was one of the first groups of Black people to own their own businesses. In the early 1900s, most Black people had jobs that required very hard labor for little money. This put great strains on families because often the mother and father would be out working all day, leaving little time for their children or each other. Another problem was that almost every colored facility was broken down, dirty, and below reasonable standard for use. The UNIA resolved these issues. They gave jobs and opportunities to many Black people. They created and owned Black restaurants and schools. In the schools, the teachers taught with love and taught the children to be proud of where they come from. There were many different businesses, including a steam laundry service, 2 restaurants, and 3 grocery stores. This was a great accomplishment. There were also UNIA soldiers to help protect people as well. They had fancy uniforms and they stood very proud. They also had their very own nurses that were called the Black Cross nurses, who wore crisp black or white dresses with little hats to match. Members of the UNIA even went so far as to create their own shipping line called the Black Star Shipping Line. Each member gave $5 towards the cost of buying a huge ship called the SS Frederick Douglass. The shipping line would go on to eventually own 3 ships, all owned and operated by UNIA members. The ships made it possible to travel comfortably and trade between Africa, the Caribbean, Central America, and the United States. Marcus Garvey, in his continued attempt to unite Black people all over the world, created a flag that would become national African symbol that we still see today. The flag is red, black, and green and looks like this. The red is for the blood of the people. The black is for the people. The green is for the land. A huge convention in New York at Madison Square Garden was held among all the Black leaders of that time, called the International Convention of the Negro People of the World. During this convention, people flew this flag on their cars as they attended meetings. The convention lasted a month, while at meetings they discussed ways to improve the conditions that Black Africans were living in all over the world. Marcus even started a movement for the liberation of Africa called Africa for the Africans. It was started because a lot of Europeans moved to Africa and took over the African governments and treated the African people very unfairly. Garvey suggested that Black people from all over the world move back to Africa and help redistribute the power to the people in which it belonged. Many countries have taken advantage of the resources and people of Africa rather than trade fairly or buy materials. It was also very important to Marcus that Black people learn more about who they truly were. After being in foreign countries for so long, they began to adopt the traditions and ways of those countries. Black people knew nothing of the beautiful languages they once spoke, the lavish clothing, or the purposeful lives and ceremonies practiced in Africa. Marcus took notice, especially in countries like the USA, that Africans had no desire to know where they came from. In 1927, Marcus Garvey moved back to Jamaica, where he was treated like the hero that he was. He got married to a woman named Amy Jacques, who had 2 sons. Marcus Garvey Jr., and Julius Garvey. He ran for government council and won. However, things had become so corrupt that it was nearly impossible for Marcus to change things as fast as people wanted. Marcus Garvey made it his mission in life to help Black people live better lives. He continued his mission until his death on June 10, 1940. He was only 53 years old. His legacy has lived on and to this current day influences people to be great and learn about their history. There are many great books, posters, statues, parks, and streets honoring the great Honorable Marcus Garvey. There is even money in Jamaica with Marcus Garvey's face on it. Marcus Garvey encouraged a lot of people to work hard for what they believed in, be very proud of who they were, and to be dedicated in helping other people. Marcus Mosiah Garvey was once a little boy from a poor family in Jamaica with an idea. With determination and faith, he made a big difference in other people's lives and this world. It is still very important even today to continue to learn about your people's history, culture, and traditions. You can do this through reading books, using the internet, and learning from other people. Also, never be afraid to be the first person to speak up or create a new idea about anything. One person can make a huge difference, and that one person can be you. The Success of Marcus Garvey. You guys, how wonderful is this book? This man did so much for the African people. And when I say African people, I mean, like it said in the book, Americans, Africans, Caribbeans, Afro-Latinas, all of our people. Marcus Garvey was really focused on bringing us together so that we can work together and have cooperative group economics. What that means is we pool whatever small resources that we have together so that we can build our communities so that they reflect the way that we want them to look, instead of relying on other people to tell us how we should look, behave, and interact with each other. We have more power than we believe. If we start working together, start bridging those gaps, we can start to see the real change that we want to see in our communities and the broader world. I hope you enjoyed this story and you'll tune in next time for another edition of Kulture Kids Storytime.